Cowboy saves two Apache boys. Next day, their father arrives with strange reward. Before we get into this story, I've got a gift for you. I've written an exclusive Wild West tale you won't find on YouTube, and it's completely free. Just check the link in the description or the pinned comment to grab your copy. Now saddle up and let's ride straight into today's story. Before we dive in, pause for a moment and tell me something. Where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Maybe it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France. Don't just watch quietly. Drop a comment below and let's see how far this story reaches across the world. Now lean in and let's begin. The desert sun burned mercilessly over the ragged ridges of New Mexico, painting the canyon walls in molten gold and blood-red shadows. On the lonely trail near Rio de los Animas, a cowboy named Eloy Duran tightened his reins as the sound of desperate cries cut through the wind. He dismounted quickly, scanning the brush with wary eyes. What he found froze him. Two Apache boys, no older than 12, cornered by a pair of drunken drifters who had them by the hair, knives glinting in the fading light. Eloy's heart slammed against his ribs. He had seconds to act. The drifters jeered, taunting the frightened children, threatening to sell them off in town. Eloy didn't hesitate. With one swift motion, his Colt cleared the holster, thunder cracking across the canyon. One drifter fell instantly. The second turned in shock, his knife raised, but Eloy's boot connected with his jaw before steel could taste skin. The man went sprawling, unconscious against the dust. The boys, trembling and wide-eyed, clutched each other, unsure whether to trust a stranger who had just saved them. Eloy knelt down, lowering his revolver. "You're safe now," he said softly, though he knew his accent marked him as a foreigner. One boy whispered in Apache. Words Eloy couldn't understand, but he caught the meaning in their eyes. Fear mingled with fragile hope. He gave them water from his canteen, wrapping his coat around their shoulders. Night was coming, and with it, new dangers. As coyotes howled in the distance, Eloy wondered what had dragged these boys so far from their people. Rescuing them was only the beginning. Tomorrow would bring questions and perhaps vengeance. But what Eloy didn't know was that by saving those boys, he had set fire to a chain of events that would test every ounce of courage he possessed. And at sunrise, a rider would come looking for him. Eloy built a small fire that night, setting the boys near the warmth while his horse grazed close by. Their eyes never left him. Two small orphans of the desert, too frightened to sleep, too exhausted to cry. He tried offering dried meat, but only the younger one, whom he later learned was named Nate, dared nibble. The older, Chenoa, kept his gaze fixed on the dark horizon, listening for threats Eloy couldn't hear. There was something proud and unyielding in that boy's stare, something that warned Eloy this was no ordinary rescue. Sleep came in fragments. Eloy dreamed of home, of France's rolling hills, and the brother he left buried in the Franco-Prussian War. He awoke to silence, the kind that makes a man reach for his gun. The boys were huddled closer, and a shape moved against the dying embers. Coyotes lingered at the edge of the firelight, yellow eyes watching. Eloy fired into the air, scattering them, but unease lingered. Danger always seemed to stalk innocence. By dawn, the boys began whispering to each other in low tones. Eloy didn't understand their words, but he caught a name repeated often, Taza. The way they said it was reverent, fearful, and filled with weight. He realized it must be their father, or perhaps their chieftain. Either way, he suspected the man was important, very important. As the sun rose over the canyons, Eloy saddled his horse and motioned for the boys to mount. If they stayed out here alone, death would find them again. They hesitated, but Nate climbed up behind him, while Chenoa followed on foot. Together, they rode toward the river. Eloy thought he was leading them to safety. In truth, he was leading himself into the very heart of a storm. The drifters he killed had friends, and word of two missing Apache boys would spread like wildfire through the frontier. By the time the sun crested high, Eloy spotted dust trails on the horizon. Riders. 2, maybe 3. His gut clenched. Could be bounty hunters, could be friends of the drifters, or worse, settlers who'd kill Apache children on sight. He spurred his horse toward the riverbank, urging the boys to stay low. Bullets whined across the air. Whoever they were, they'd already spotted him. Chenoa shouted in Apache, shoving his brother down. The boys' instincts were sharp, forged by survival. Aloy returned fire, forcing the riders to scatter behind rocks. The fight was uneven. He was outnumbered, protecting 2 children with little cover. He needed to think fast. Nearby, the canyon walls curved inward, forming a narrow choke point. If he could lure them there, he might just stand a chance. The riders advanced, shouting curses. Aloy's hands were steady, his breath calm, but inside, he knew every bullet counted. He fired twice, one man tumbling from his horse. The others pressed harder. Chenoa hurled a stone with surprising force, striking one rider's horse and sending it rearing. The boy's defiance lit something fierce in Aloy's chest. These weren't helpless children. They were warriors in the making. With a final shot, the last rider retreated, wounded but alive. Silence fell, broken only by the boy's heavy breathing. Aloy holstered his Colt, scanning the empty trail. He'd won for now, but someone would ask why 3 armed riders failed to return. Someone dangerous. And that someone would come riding by sunrise. They made camp by the river, exhaustion hanging heavy in the air. Nate clung to Aloy's sleeve, his small hands trembling, while Chenoa finally broke his silence. In broken English, he said, "Our father, Taza." The name came out like thunder wrapped in sorrow. Aloy leaned in, trying to piece together the fragments. Taza was her father, a war chief, respected, feared. And if Aloy understood right, Taza did not forgive debts lightly, whether of blood or of honor. The boys explained that raiders had ambushed their band, scattering families. They'd been taken, dragged toward the border to be sold. If Aloy hadn't appeared, they would already be gone. The realization settled heavy on him. He hadn't just saved children. He'd saved the heirs of a chief whose name made even hardened outlaws shudder. That night, Aloy sat awake, staring into the fire. He thought of his brother, of promises left unkept. He thought of the war that had scarred him, and how he'd sought peace in this vast, untamed land. Yet peace never seemed to last. Trouble had a way of finding him, no matter how far he rode. Before dawn, distant drumming echoed faintly through the canyon. The boy stiffened, eyes wide with recognition. "Father!" Chenoa whispered, voice trembling. Aloy rose to his feet, heart pounding. The sound grew louder, closer, until the first figures appeared at the ridge. Warriors, proud and painted for battle, their silhouettes fierce against the rising sun. And at their center rode a man whose presence silenced even the wind. Taza had come. Taza dismounted with the grace of a predator, his eyes dark as obsidian, his face carved with lines of grief and fire. The boys ran to him, throwing themselves into his arms. For a brief moment, Aloy saw only a father's relief, raw and unguarded. But when Taza's gaze lifted to meet his, the warmth vanished. Silence stretched between them, thick as storm clouds. Taza studied him. Then the dead riders sprawled by the river. Finally, he spoke in measured English, his voice deep and commanding. "You saved my sons." Aloy nodded, unsure what to expect. Gratitude? Suspicion? Death? He'd seen enough of the frontier to know that saving lives didn't always buy mercy. Taza stepped closer, circling him like a hawk assessing prey. Then, without warning, he dropped a bundle at Aloy's feet. Inside lay something Aloy had never seen before, a necklace strung with carved bone, turquoise, and a pendant shaped like a coiled serpent. It radiated an aura he couldn't explain, as though the desert itself pulsed through it. "This," Taza said, "is not payment. It is a burden, a mark. You carry it now." Aloy frowned, confused. But before he could speak, the chief raised his hand. "Men will come for it, for you, and when they do, you will understand why saving my sons was both your fortune and your curse." The wind shifted, rattling the canyon brush. Aloy suddenly felt the weight of destiny settle on his shoulders. He had saved 2 boys, but in doing so, he had just stepped into a war far greater than he imagined. And somewhere beyond the horizon, someone was already hunting him. Aloy held the necklace in his hands, its strange serpent pendant gleaming faintly under the sun. It wasn't gold or silver, yet it carried a heaviness he couldn't explain, like it wasn't just an ornament, but a story, a curse, and a promise all tangled into one. Taza stood unmoving, his sons clinging to his sides. "This was carved long before you came here," the chief said. "Now it belongs to you. Do not lose it. Do not run from it. For the desert follows those marked by the serpent." The words made little sense to Aloy, but he knew enough to feel the danger. He wanted to refuse, to say this wasn't his burden, but Chenoa's sharp gaze held him still. The boy who had barely trusted him now looked at him with something deeper, recognition, maybe even destiny. Nate reached forward, touching Aloy's arm as if to seal the bond. That night, Aloy lay awake again, the necklace pressed into his palm. He tried to imagine the lives it passed through, the secrets it carried, and why Taza would entrust it to a foreigner. Around them, the warriors sang softly in Apache, voices blending with the crackle of fire. Yet beneath the beauty of the song, Aloy felt only a rising dread, and as the embers dimmed, he caught sight of something glinting on the ridge, a spyglass, pointed right at him. Someone had been watching the entire exchange. By dawn, word had already spread to the nearest frontier town of Santa Rosa. In the saloon, posters hit the walls. $500 reward for the capture of Aloy Durand, wanted for murder and theft of Apache relic. The description was clear. French cowboy, lean frame, scar along the jaw, last seen near Rio de los Animas. $500 was enough to tempt drifters, mercenaries, and even lawmen willing to twist the truth. Aloy didn't know yet that his name was riding the wind faster than any horse. He only knew that when he returned to his camp, Taza was gone. His warriors vanished without a trace. Only the boys remained, and at their feet, fresh hoof prints led away from a canyon. The chief had disappeared into the desert, leaving Aloy with his sons and the burden of the serpent necklace. "Why did he leave you?" Aloy asked, but Chenoa only answered with steel in his voice. "He did not leave. He tests." Nate said nothing, only pressing close to Aloy as if he already knew men were coming. And come they did. Before noon, gunfire cracked along the ridge, bullets sparking against the stone. Aloy pulled the boys down behind cover. Above them, bounty hunters hooped and cursed, shouting his name. The serpent pendant had drawn blood before, and it was about to again. With no choice, Aloy led the boys into Santa Rosa under cover dusk. He pulled his hat low, keeping in the shadows, but the town smelled of trouble, gun oil, whiskey, and greed. Posters with his face lined the boards outside the saloon. His horse, weary from the hard ride, staggered as they tied it near the livery. "Stay close," Aloy told the boys. Inside the saloon, a piano played off-key while card players leaned over tables thick with cigar smoke. Aloy approached the barkeep, hoping for water and bread, but silence fell the moment his accent betrayed him. A man at the corner table spat. "Well, look what the desert dragged in. $500, sitting right here in front of us." Guns scraped from holsters. Aloy's hand shot to his coat, but Nate screamed first, drawing every eye to the child. That hesitation saved Aloy. He flipped the table, knocking two men off balance, and fired through the haze. Chaos exploded. Glass shattered. The piano keeled over, and men roared as bullets split the air. Chenoa grabbed a knife from the counter, slashing wildly to protect his brother. They barely escaped, ducking through an alley as the saloon erupted behind them. But Santa Rosa was no longer safe. The serpent had painted Aloy's face on every wall in town. For 2 days, bounty hunters tracked him across the desert. Dust rose behind hard-riding horses. Bullets cracked across canyons, and the boys clung to Aloy's sides as he pushed his mount beyond exhaustion. The necklace seemed to burn hotter each hour, as if mocking him for carrying it. He began to believe Taza had known this would happen, that he had passed a curse, not a gift. At night, Aloy dreamed of serpents coiled in fire, whispering a language he could not understand. He'd wake drenched in sweat, the boys staring at him with silent fear. Chenoa finally asked, "Why do you keep it?" Aloy had no answer. All he knew was that throwing it away felt impossible, as though invisible hands would drag it back to him. On the 3rd day, they reached the dry basin known as Laguna del Silencio. But silence was broken quickly. Bullets struck the dust, horses screamed, and 5 riders closed in from all sides. Aloy's revolver roared, but he was outnumbered. A shot tore his shoulder, fire racing down his arm. He staggered, blood staining the sand. The boys screamed his name, and through the ringing in his ears, Aloy saw a shadow rise from the rocks above, the unmistakable figure of Taza, bow drawn tight. Arrows flew like lightning, striking 2 bounty hunters before they could reload. Warriors appeared from the ridges, moving with deadly precision. In moments, the tide turned. The remaining hunters fled into the desert, leaving their dead behind. Aloy collapsed to his knees, clutching his wound. The world blurred, but one image stayed sharp, Taza dismounting, his eyes fixed not on him, but on the necklace. "You carry it still," the chief said. His voice carried neither gratitude nor reproach, only inevitability. Aloy spat blood, groaning. "I never asked for it." Taza knelt, pressing a hand to Aloy's shoulder to stop the bleeding. The desert does not ask. It chooses. That night, while Aloy's wound was tended, Taza revealed fragments of the truth. The serpent pendant was said to belong to an ancient brotherhood of warriors, bound to guard their people through generations. Whoever carried it was marked, pursued by greed, hunted by enemies, and forever tied to the fate of the land. "You saved my sons," Taza said, "so the land chose you." Aloy stared into the flames, torn between disbelief and the weight of what he'd seen. The boy slept beside him, but he felt no peace. For even as the fire crackled, he sensed eyes watching from beyond the circle of light. The serpent had many hunters, and they were not finished. The days that followed blurred together in dust and blood. Aloy traveled with Taza's band, the boys never leaving his side. Yet unease grew like thorns. The warriors accepted him in silence, but their eyes whispered mistrust. He was an outsider carrying a sacred relic, and that made him both ally and threat. One evening, as they crossed a jagged labyrinth of Canon del Cuervo, a shot split the stillness. Chaos erupted, warriors scrambling for cover, arrows loose into the shadows. But this attack was different. The ambushers weren't bounty hunters. They were Apache, painted in rival colors. A civil rift. Aloy fired back, dragging Nate behind a boulder. Chenoa fought like a wildcat with a stolen rifle. But the ambush wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to expose. When the rival war chief, Kozin, stepped from the rocks, his words were venom. "You give the serpent to a foreigner? A man who knows nothing of our blood." Gasps rippled through the warriors. Kozin's accusation cut deep, and Aloy felt the eyes of the band burn into him. Taza stood unmoved. "The serpent chose him," he said. But Kozin only sneered. "Then let the desert decide." That night, Aloy realized the greatest danger was not from bounty hunters, but from the very people whose sons he had saved. At dawn, the canyon floor became an arena. Warriors formed a wide circle, chanting low as smoke rose from burning sage. Kozin stepped forward, a spear gleaming in his grip. "Trial by fire," he declared. "If this foreigner survives, the serpent's choice is true. If he falls, it returns to its people." Aloy's stomach clenched. His shoulder wound still burned his body weak, but refusing meant death. He gripped his Colt, knowing bullets against spears would brand him coward. Taza handed him only a knife. "The desert sees truth in steel, not powder," he said. The fight erupted fast. Kozin lunged, spear whistling past Aloy's ribs. Sen kicked up, sweat stung his eyes. He ducked, rolled, and struck with a knife, cutting shallow across Kozin's arm. The warriors roared approval. But Kozin was relentless, his strikes like thunder. Aloy staggered, nearly losing his blade. Then, nature's cry pierced the circle. The boy had broken through, hurling a stone at Kozin's chest. It gave Aloy the single heartbeat he needed. He twisted, slamming the knife into the spear shaft, snapping it in two. Kozin stumbled. Aloy pressed the blade to his throat, but stopped short. Killing him would only feed division. Breathless, he lowered the knife. Silence fell. Taza stepped forward, raising Aloy's arm. The desert has spoken. Yet Kozin's eyes glowed with hatred. The trial had ended, But the war for the serpent had only begun. That night, Taza revealed the truth Aloy had long dreaded. By sparing Kozan, Aloy had proven strength of spirit, but it also ensured vengeance would follow. The chief leaned close to the fire, voice heavy with memory. This pendant is older than nations. It was carved by the first guardians to remind us that blood and sacrifice bind all who wear it. Every man who carried it died young, but not before his story shaped the desert. Aloy turned the serpent in his hands, its coiled form catching the firelight. He thought of France, of the graves left behind, of the endless running that had brought him here. For the first time, he wondered if he had ever been running toward something, not away. Chenoa listened intently, his young face hard with determination. "Then I will carry it after him," he said boldly. The words froze Aloy. He looked at the boy, the firelight flickering in his eyes, and saw the future. Too much weight for a child. "No," Aloy said firmly. "Your time will come." But not yet. Taza's gaze lingered on him. "Perhaps the desert was wiser than I thought, foreigner." But in the shadows beyond the fire, Kozan listened and planned. The following day, Aloy scouted the ridges for signs of pursuit. What he found chilled him. Spent shells, tracks of many horses, and scraps of wanted posters torn into the dirt. Kozan had betrayed them, trading knowledge of the pendant's bearer to bounty hunters in exchange for power. They came at night. Rifles cracked. Flames lit the camp, and screams split the canyon walls. Aloy fought shoulder to shoulder with Taza, the boys scrambling for safety. Arrows flew, bullets roared, and the air filled with smoke. In the chaos, Aloy saw Kozan guiding the attackers, pointing straight at him. Rage boiled inside. He pursued the traitor through fire and sand, their blades clashing under the blood-red moon. Kozan sneered. "You should have killed me when you had the chance." Their struggle ended on a cliff's edge. Kozan lunged, but Aloy twisted, sending him over the rim. The war chief's scream echoed into silence. When Aloy staggered back to camp, he found half the warriors dead, the rest wounded. Taza knelt beside his fallen brother in arms, blood on his hands, eyes dim with sorrow. The cost of mercy weighed heavy on them all, and Aloy realized the serpent's curse was not just pursuit. It was loss. At dawn, the survivors buried their dead under cairns of stone. Songs rose over the desert, raw with grief. Taza stood tall, his sons at his side, but his face was carved with exhaustion. He turned to Aloy, voice breaking for first time. "You saved them, but by saving them, you have inherited their war. I cannot undo this." Aloy's throat tightened. He thought of the boy Nate, clinging to his sleeve, and of Chenoa, already speaking like a man grown. He had no children of his own, no family left in France. Somehow, these two had become his blood. That night, Taza placed a hand on Aloy's shoulder. "If death comes for me, you must promise me something. Protect them, even if the serpent drags you both into the fire." Aloy met his eyes, the weight of the vow sinking deep. "I promise." From the shadows, Nate whispered a word Aloy didn't understand, but the tone was clear. "Father." And as the wind swept through the canyon, Aloy knew there was no turning back. The weeks that followed were a blur of flight and skirmish. Bounty hunters closed in from every border, and whispers spread that even the U.S. cavalry sought the serpent. Wherever they rode, danger followed. One night, under a thunderstorm that split the plains with fire, Aloy saw it all unravel. Lightning revealed riders on every ridge, closing like wolves. Taza rallied his warriors, calling for one last stand. The boys clung to Aloy's arms, terror in their eyes. The storm broke with fury. Gunfire and thunder became one. Horses screamed, men fell, and lightning split the earth. Aloy fought until his hands bled, until his revolver clicked empty. Beside him, Taza struck down foes like a whirlwind, but fate was cruel. A rifle cracked, and the chief staggered, blood spilling across his chest. "Father!" Chenoa's cries split the storm. Taza fell into Aloy's arms. His last breath rasped against a roar of thunder. "Remember your promise." And then the storm swallowed his voice forever. They buried Taza at dawn, the earth still wet with rain. His sons stood silent, faces carved in stone, their innocence burned away. Aloy placed a serpent necklace on the cairn, but Chenoa shook his head fiercely. No, you carry it still, until the end. Aloy's heart ached, but he obeyed. The burden was his now, as much as the boys were his blood. Together, they rode west, hunted at every turn, the horizon always on fire with pursuit. Every mile, Aloy wondered if he could keep them safe. Every mile, he heard Taza's voice in the wind. Protect them, even if the serpent drags you into the fire. The boys grew harder, quieter. Nache no longer cried. Chenoa no longer laughed. And Aloy felt his soul break under the weight of their silence. The desert was stripping them all bare. When they reached the fort at San Cristobal, Aloy thought they had found refuge. The commanding officer welcomed them, promised shelter and protection. For a brief night, Aloy allowed himself hope. But hope was a lie. At dawn, soldiers stormed their quarters, rifles aimed, demanding the serpent. The officer's smile was venom. You're worth more dead than alive. Frenchmen, hand it over, and perhaps I let the boys live. Aloy's blood turned to ice. He shoved Nache behind him, raised his Colt. The standoff was seconds from slaughter when Chenoa screamed a warning. Apache warriors had surrounded the fort. Cozen's kin come for vengeance. Gunfire exploded. Soldiers and warriors clashed in a storm of iron and blood. Aloy dragged the boys through fire, every step a miracle. But as they burst into the desert beyond the fort, he knew there was no refuge left, only the final reckoning. At the base of the Sierra Oscura, Aloy made his choice. They would not run anymore. He built a barricade of stone, placed the boys behind him, and stood ready as dozens of riders closed in. His revolver gleamed in the dying sun. The battle was chaos. Bullets ripped through the air, horses screamed, and blood stained the sand. Aloy fought like a man already dead, every shot buying another heartbeat for the boys. But numbers overwhelmed. A rifle cracked, and fire tore through his side. He fell to one knee, gasping, the serpent pendant heavy against his chest. Chenoa rushed forward, screaming his name. Aloy pushed him back, shoving the necklace into his hand. No, not yet. Run. Protect your brother. Live. The boy shook his head, tears burning his cheeks. You promise. Aloy smiled through the blood, and I kept it. Then he rose one last time and charged into fire. When the dust settled, silence fell over the Sierra Oscura. The hunters lay scattered, their greed silenced forever. And on the blood-stained earth, Aloy Duran's body rested still, his coat empty, his eyes closed as if dreaming of a land far from the desert. Nache wept, clinging to his brother. But Chenoa, though broken, remembered the promise. He took the serpent pendant and placed it gently on Aloy's chest. You carried it with honor, he whispered. Now the desert carries you. Warriors emerged from the shadows, survivors of Taza's band. They bowed their heads in silence, honoring the foreigner who had fought as one of their own. Chenoa stood tall, his brother beside him, the serpent pendant now warm against his palm. He would carry it, but not as a curse. As a reminder, Aloy had come to the frontier seeking peace, and instead had found family. His reward was not gold, not land, not glory. It was 2 boys who would live because of him. 2 sons of the desert, forever carrying his story in their blood. And as the sun set over the wild, untamed horizon, the wind seemed to whisper his name, Aloy Duran, the cowboy who saved 2 Apache boys and paid the price with a reward stranger and greater than any man could imagine. Sparkles the end.